Right now, Pittsburgh's best sports show is about to begin. Call us or tweet us. We've got things to talk about on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call.
Thank you, Erica. Welcome, everybody, to the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. I'm your host, Josh Taylor, bringing you the fun stuff to discuss on a Thursday night. Steelers and Seahawks coming up on Sunday. Penguins have a couple of home games coming up here after winning a big game on the road last night. And did we just find a new clubhouse leader for the weirdest bowl game during bowl season? We'll talk about those things and more with my guest. He's live in the 93.7 The Fan newsroom. Chris Muller joins me once again. Chris, let's start with the Steelers here. Steelers and Seahawks coming up this weekend. A lot of discussion about what the Steelers could see on offense. We had some comments earlier in the day. We ran it through a couple of different shows talking about the Steelers defense. Pete Carroll talked about TJ Watt, Cam Hayward talking about the linebackers and such. Going into this game, Chris, I think we come off that matchup with the Steelers in Cincinnati last week. We saw what Mason Rudolph did. Now you come into this game where it's a defense in Seattle, statistically not among the greatest in the league, but they've had a couple of really good weeks. They've won back-to-back games. What are you looking at specifically for this offense, not just Mason Rudolph, but the offense in general, that gives you a chance, or gives them a chance maybe, and makes you think they could win this game?
Well, what makes me think they could win this game and that they have a chance is that Mason Rudolph is like the guy playing on Thursday night right now, a poor man's version of that guy, the ultimate quick strike artist. He hit several huge plays in that game against the Bengals that made the difference. A quick slant, a couple of go balls, and poof, the Steelers got instant offense. I think there's always this idea when your team is struggling, you want to see them put together these like long sustained drives because it somehow gives the notion or conveys the sense that they're coming out of it offensively finally. Well, scoring very quickly and on very few plays is really fun too. So that's why I think the Steelers have a chance. As far as what I'm looking for, I mean, I think it's going to be pretty intriguing to see how the Steelers react and how Mason Rudolph reacts now that their opponent actually has a week's worth or a game's worth of tape on him. We know that the Bengals dared Rudolph to throw the ball down the sideline and largely took away the middle of the field where the Steelers killed them the first time they played with Freiermuth. Well, Mason Rudolph doesn't mind chucking the ball down the sideline on go routes. That's kind of how he got drafted into the NFL. So does Pete Carroll and that Seattle defense, which isn't good statistically but is pretty good in scoring defense because they're tight in the red zone, did they force Mason Rudolph to throw to the more crowded areas of the field? I think that particular dynamic, how the Seahawks adjust to what they saw in film, and then how Rudolph is able to or not able to punch back, is the really intriguing dynamic heading into this game.
That's where my mind is, because it's one thing when a team doesn't see you coming and they don't have a lot of film on you. But when they have, whether it's a week or 2 weeks, and in the case of a lot of backup quarterbacks in the league, all it takes is a couple games. I think it took maybe 2 or 3 games of Jake Browning for teams to really start to figure him out. So it doesn't really take a lot for teams to figure out what you're capable of for them to actually prepare for you when they see you coming. And we've seen it, Chris. You've seen it as much as I have. There are a slew of backups across this league that are hot in 1 minute, they're cold the next minute. They're lighting things up 1 minute, they're back on the bench for the starter the next minute. Seattle's one of those teams. They sat Geno Smith. Well, Geno Smith got injured at one point. They sat him. Drew Lock comes in. Then they go back to Geno Smith. Seattle's seen it too, where the backup quarterback comes in and they say, you know what, we got to go back to the starter. So we've seen how that crest in that trough happens when it comes to backup quarterbacks in this league.
Josh Dobbs is the one that kind of scared me straight on that front because, Kevin O'Connell was just gushing about how great Dobbs had performed, and I was just sitting here saying, wow, this guy looks like better than anybody on the Steelers roster. He's their emergency quarterback now. Somebody named Jaron Hall, pride of BYU, I believe, is going to be their starter.
And he's their fourth guy.
Right, so they cycled through Nick Mullins after Cousins gets hurt. Here's Jaron Hall, who they didn't feel good enough about to play when Dobbs came in as the emergency guy. Now Dobbs is sitting on the bench. I really do think in most cases there's a 2 to 3 game window where a backup quarterback can thrive. You might want to call it the Fitzpatrick window if you'd like. And then typically if the guy isn't doing something sustainable, they'll be figured out. I do point out at this juncture, though, Josh, that's why what's happening in Cleveland shouldn't be a shock. Flacco's numbers are a little bit like erratic, maybe I want to say. They're high. What would Mike Sullivan call them if it was hockey? He'd say they're high event football. A lot of touchdowns, a lot of turnovers. But Joe Flacco isn't a backup per se.
No.
He's a guy who's done it in the NFL. He's a guy who's won the whole thing and played unbelievable. So they're at an advantage. But you're seeing it, like you said, all around the league. And you know what? If it's 3 games for Mason before everyone figures him out, that's good news for the Steelers because 2 more wins likely gets them to the playoffs.
That's a very good point. 412-575-2600. Want to hear your points on the situation. Want to hear your points on the offense and what you expect to see from this game. We will take a break. When we come back, we got our tweet of the night. We're answering phone calls. We're reading tweets. We're doing the whole 9 yards. Stick around. Time for our GMC Sierra tweet of the night. Comes from Ian Rappaport, NFL Network. He says, before the Browns, no team called Joe Flacco to bring him in for a workout. Tonight, 16 of 22 for 296 yards with 3 touchdowns and a 135.4 passer rating in the first half. And at last glance, Cleveland leading the Jets 34-17 right now. With the win, Cleveland makes it into the playoffs, I believe. Chris Muller joining me right now. We're talking a lot of football here. Got a couple questions on Twitter as well. Got one in particular. Which Steeler has had the most disappointing season for you, Chris?
Oh, boy. Of guys that have actually played the entire year and not been disappointing because they've gotten injured, I'm going to say Mason Cole. I think we all expected maybe, if we were lucky, just average center play, nothing spectacular, but he has been extremely below average. He has really been a disappointment in just about every conceivable way. There's a bunch of guys in the defensive line that were supposed to. You know what? There's another guy. I'll give the award out to 2 people. How about DeMarvin Leal? Is DeMarvin Leal? Does he exist? Is he on a milk carton?
That's a good one.
Classic case where I think everybody looks at the bright side when they draft a guy and they say, oh, he's got a tweener body, but they'll figure out the best position for him and he'll just be a Swiss Army knife type of weapon. Well, the opposite has happened. They can't figure out how to use DeMarvin Leal, and the great athleticism and everything else is going to waste because they can't figure out where to put him on the field that might maximize his production. So I'll give it to both of those guys combined. And that's Josh me skipping the obvious here, which is saying you draft a quarterback 20th overall, he looks like Kenny Pickett has looked. That is, by definition, I don't care what his win-loss record is, a massive disappointment.
Yeah, I thought you did that carefully when you qualified it with guys who have played in every game. I figured that's why you were setting that to the side. I can't agree with you more about Mason Cole. I cannot agree more. I have never seen a situation where, outside of maybe that last season with Marquise Pouncey, where a center's snapping got worse as the season went along. And we're seeing that with Mason Cole. Not only has the quality of his shotgun snaps gotten worse, it just seems like every other snap he's getting blown off the ball. It's almost like that quality of play has gotten lesser and lesser over time, and that's something that you just don't see very often. We have Nancy in Tarentum on the line, 412-575-2600. Nancy, you're on the Nightly Sports Call.
Hi, Josh. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Nancy.
My question is, Joey Porter, what are they going to do about him making all these penalties? Are they going to calm him down or what? Just seems like every time there's a penalty, it's because of him.
I don't think they
Nancy,
care that
they
much.
knew what they were getting into.
Exactly.
They knew exactly what they were getting into, Nancy. They knew that Joey Porter Jr. was a hyper-physical guy. They, I think, made the decision when they drafted him that they were going to live with the fact that he was probably going to get called for some penalties. That one against Alec Pierce, I know, 2 weeks ago, people cited, and it was a bad one, and it was a bad penalty, and I would hope Joey Porter, in the moment, might react one way, but in film study would realize, yeesh, yeah, okay, I dragged him down by the arm. But what you haven't seen or what you don't say about Joey Porter that maybe warrants more mention is that there have been several games where he has just shut down a top guy on the other side and really limited the effectiveness of some pretty stout wide receivers. Josh, you started this show by talking about what do you want to see or what do you expect to see or what's interesting about the Steelers' offense heading into this game. You want to talk about a matchup that I think is going to be a real litmus test for Porter?
Give it to me.
He's a physical corner. He's a big corner. DK Metcalf's a grown man, and he is ultra physical, and he is ultra confident. And they are going to – I want to see how much Joey Porter Jr. follows him, because that's big boy football when 14 gets it for the Seahawks.
I was waiting for you to say that one. And to your point, I agree with you on this. For every penalty Joey Porter takes, there are 2 or 3 plays that he makes where you don't hear or see the other team's best receiver. That is a ratio I will take every time, sight unseen. I don't even need to think about it. His ability to take a key receiver out of the game, not just once, not just twice, pretty much every time he stepped out on the field, he has been able to handle the other team's best receiver and do it consistently. It is worth the cost you're paying as far as the penalties. And then there's the other thing that we were worried about earlier in the season, Chris, the open field tackling. He's gotten better at that. So not only has he done a really good job as far as locking down other teams' receivers, he's actually gotten better with the open field tackling, and that was a concern after he couldn't bring Puka Nacua down to the ground. He's gotten better with that too. So there are some things he has shored up. I think the penalties are going to happen, not to mention the fact they play in the National Football League. Those penalties are going to be called even when they're not using hands as much, because that's just par for the course. But other than that, I have no complaints about Joey Porter Jr.
I mean, he's got the mentality that you want. He actually looks like a playmaker out there, and far too often the Steelers have had guys you just kind of crossed your fingers or prayed to the sky above and said, hey, are they going to hold up in coverage until the pass rush gets there? I think they've also been a team philosophically that said, we just need good enough corners until our pass rush gets there. I think this is one of the rare times they've tried to find a guy that can profile as a true number one. Though I will say his tackling still is a disappointment, but that might be because the last time I can really clearly think of him in the open field ready to make a tackle, Quentin Nelson was also bearing down on him.
Yeah, there's that.
And Joey Porter made a very wise business decision, because if Quentin Nelson was bearing down on me, I'd just give him my wallet, I'd throw it at him and run the other direction. But yeah, I mean, I think he's, you know what, like if I'm looking at not a silver lining, this team's still alive for the playoffs, Josh, but if I'm looking at something to be positive about from this season, I think there's reason to be very optimistic about Broderick Jones, about Keanu Benton, about Joey Porter Jr., if Darnell Washington's knee gets right, about him, and then about Nick Herbig. They've got, I think, several draft picks from this class that look very promising, and that's how you rebuild a roster quietly without people maybe taking a ton of note of it.
And that's not counting Corey Trice, whom we didn't mention because he was hurt before training camp was even over. So at that point, Corey Trice kind of becomes a bonus in addition to all of that. But all 5 of those guys you mentioned have all been contributors on this team. They've all made plays in games, and they've all been significant as far as helping this team win games. We got to take another break. We'll wrap up when we come back. Stick around. But before we get to that, a few minutes left in the show, and Chris Muller's here. Chris, last night we talked about the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and we talked about the conclusion of the bowl game. And Neil Brown, after West Virginia beat North Carolina, how he was dunked with a giant tub of mayonnaise. Then tonight happened with the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Not only was there a live, walking, breathing mascot that had pieces of an edible outfit that it was giving to people throughout the course of the game. But then after the game, the winning team was allowed to sample from what remained of said live mascot because it became part of the winning prize for the winning team, a giant Pop-Tart that was once alive. It was a weird kind of situation. They kind of made it seem like the Pop-Tart died and they just ate it. I don't know what happened, Chris. I'll give you the floor because I can't figure it out. It's just interesting to me. I don't know why.
So we had an anthropomorphic Pop-Tart that went down into the toaster after the game, then slid out with the person having been conveniently removed from the proceedings like they ran into the Donner Party here. Is that what you're telling me?
It was very similar to that, yes. Now that you put it that way, it's very well put, very well said, yes.
Okay, so here's my thought, my main thought. I knew about the edible Pop-Tart costume. My real question is, who on earth actually puts their Pop-Tarts in the toaster? Don't get me started here. I know they're a toaster pastry. You don't have to, hey, Chris, what do you think the point is? We all eat them room temperature, do we not?
I put mine in the toaster.
Put your
sometimes.
hand down, Josh.
Sometimes. I do sometimes. It's true.
Okay, there's two things no one should do.
Sure.
Eat the Pop-Tarts without the frosting and put them in the toaster, period.
I'll
Just
agree
get a
with the
frosted
frosted part.
Pop-Tart and eat it when you're on the school bus or you're in the car driving to high school like the rest of us do, okay? Like,
I don't toast
who do
them
you
when I'm
think-
in the
Oh,
car. When I'm in the car, I don't toast
Oh,
them.
I'm fancy. I'm fancy. I put my Pop-Tarts in the toaster because I plan my mornings out. Ooh, I'm not procrastinating and getting to school right as the bell rings and going to be like zooming in there like it's Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Well, look at you, Mr. Overachiever. Congratulations on all your success.
Oh, I'm not. I was not the planned morning out guy. I was the procrastinator. Had him in his pocket. I just do it now because I have time to do it now. But I didn't have time to do it back then. Back then, I was the guy who was carrying him in his pocket, eating them room temperature. Yeah, I got older and figured I wasn't in a hurry anymore. That's the only difference, really.
Josh, I got older and decided I would continue when I had Pop-Tarts to just eat them room temperature out of principle. But yes, this is where we're at, dumping mayo on people, Pop-Tarts that are edible mascots. Why don't they have a mayo-filled Pop-Tart and make that a bowl game next year? The Duke's Mayo Pop-Tart Bowl, sponsored by, I don't know, let's throw Radio Shack in there if they still exist.
My line was drawn with mayonnaise when I found out Will Levis put it in his coffee. That was it for me. No mayo and Pop-Tarts. Don't ruin Pop-Tarts. Someone already ruined coffee this year. Leave Pop-Tarts alone. We are out of time. Thanks to Chris Muller for joining us. For Chris Muller, for our producer Steve Banco and our team here at KDKA, I'm Josh Taylor saying thanks for watching. Thanks for your calls. Thanks for your tweets. It's you guys that make this show great, and we are here for you 7 nights a week on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call, and we will be right back here tomorrow night. Same bat time, same bat channel. See you then.